Hey everybody, we're back on Right on SC with another author interview. This week I get to talk to Signe Pike. I'm super excited. We've never actually met. Here we are, virtually getting to know each other. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Right on SC. This is Author Interviews. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad it's summertime. I can't tell you. Like you said earlier, like there's not a whole lot going on right now. I'm like, I know. I'm just hanging out all day, every
That's
day.
right. Wearing bright colors and hanging out. It's great.
Yeah, it's been so far so good. So talk to me a little bit about your journey here. First of all, introduce yourself. Where'd you come from? Where are you located? Tell our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I've lived in Charleston now, in the Charleston area for 12 years. But prior to that, I was living in New York City where I worked as a book editor. And then prior to that, kind of traveled around, but I'm originally from upstate New York, from Ithaca, which is gorgeous. As many people know, Ithaca is gorgeous. And now I live on Sullivan's Island, which is wonderful, wonderful place to be, especially in the summertime. Yeah, I've been publishing books since 2010.
Right. So you've been working on the first one I saw was the travel story, right? So a fairy tale, but it's a travel story. Tell me a little bit about that one.
So that was the first book I ever wrote. It's a travel memoir, sort of similar to like a Liz Gilbert Eat, Pray, Love, except for I was searching for a sense of enchantment in life and traveled all around to Ireland, England, Scotland, Mexico, and beyond, researching people, adults, who still believed in fairies, as a skeptic myself. And so my goal was to go on this journey. I had just lost my father unexpectedly. He'd passed away. And my goal was to go on this journey as a skeptic and see if I could find some proof of the afterlife, because I figure if something as whimsical as fairies existed, as so many of these people around the world, where I was starting to discover, believed still that they did, maybe it meant that there was also the possibility of life after death and God and all of those things. So that was the book that really got me started, interested in the Celts, going to Ireland and going to Scotland and researching the nature spirits and folklore is what really got me hooked.
I'm fascinated by that. I feel like I should have read more about that before I ask you that question, because now all of a sudden I'm like, tell me more. But this is the first book. So it was the first book you'd ever written. It comes out of a personal journey. So it's a nonfiction book, right? And sort of an exploration book. But it leads you to writing this Lost Queen Trilogy. Is that right?
That's exactly what happened. I found that after I finished Fairy Tale, I just couldn't stop researching. I couldn't stop reading Celtic history and folklore, and was casting around for a long time trying to find the next thing to write, when I came upon this book in a little bookstore in Glastonbury, England. And it was another nonfiction book like mine, but it was about the historical figures that this one author believed inspired the legend of Merlin. And he had discovered that there was this man who lived in 6th century Scotland, who may have very well been the actual historical figure who inspired that role in the Arthurian legend. Turned out that this man, whose name was Lailoken, had a sister, Languoreth, and she was an actual historical figure. She was someone who we know was a queen. We know that she existed. We can place her in 6th century. And as I began to research the events that transpired during their lifetime, I felt like it was such an injustice that they've just been fictionalized. And so the Lost Queen Trilogy, which is turning into a series too, seeks to resurrect Lailoken and his sister Languoreth and bring them back into the spotlight.
Now, the second book is The Forgotten Kingdom, and that's the one that's coming out this summer. And as I was reading a little bit of the excerpt, it looks like it's first-person perspective. So does it switch back and forth between the brother and the sister, or does it stay in the one perspective?
That's a great question. The first book was all Languoreth's perspective, and it was all first person. And the second book, I started to hear Lailoken's voice. I know a lot of any other writers listening, sometimes we hear the voices of the characters. And so I started to hear him speaking, and he was speaking in first person. So I just sort of took it down that way. And then there also is a third person point of view in the book as well, which is that of Languoreth's daughter.
Gotcha. So was it challenging for you to go from the one voice to the other?
It was really strange. I had expected that it might be, but it wasn't. It felt really natural. And Lailoken is the one who opens the book. I felt as if he'd been waiting to step forward. And in The Lost Queen, he was really standing in the background because this was about his sister and his childhood. And it was really Languoreth's story. And in book 2, he came forward, and it was clear as a bell. Wrote the prologue in one sitting. I mean, it was really interesting. On Harad, the daughter, I had a hard time with because she starts off quite young in the book, and then throughout the book ages, and it's always difficult, even when you're writing third person with the perspective, it's always difficult to strike that balance on the age.
Right. Oftentimes, too, in a trilogy, we'll begin with a single character's point of view. And then when you start to open up what's really happening in the story, you kind of want to hear from these side characters. So I bet people who read The Lost Queen are going to be super excited that they're now getting this additional perspective from his point of view.
It's really exciting to write about Lailoken because, well, in legend, we know him as Merlin the wizard, but historically, he was a politician and a warrior and just happened to be pre-Christian. He just happened to not be a Christian man. He was a druid. So to write about his involvement with the mystical arts as they existed at that time in the 6th century was very cool. I read about some old rituals in some of the old Irish tales and infused those into the book as far as wisdom keepers, I call them in my book, were really just another word for druids. But they used to do this thing called the bull's sleep. Back in early medieval Ireland, where when a seer was trying to choose a king or was trying to figure out, any sort of matter of state or see into the future, they would take a little bit they would sacrifice a bull, take a little bit of the flesh of the bull and put it into their mouths. And then they would bind their bodies up, blindfold themselves and bind their bodies. And they would go into complete darkness and into this trance. And it was really cool to write about the bull's sleep in The Forgotten Kingdom, and I think that's one of my favorite scenes.
I'm completely thrown away by this. Okay, so when we think about these are based on real people, historical figures. You have a background for having researched historical figures and having wanted to get sort of to the bottom of this. You said yourself you wanted to see, it was a shame that they had been fictionalized, but these are fictional books, right? So The Lost Queen and The Lost Kingdom are both, The Forgotten Kingdom are both fictionalized books. So how does that fiction narrative play out as far as wanting to be legitimate, but also knowing it's kind of all made up?
It's any historical fiction. It's my work is the same type of book as Philippa Gregory writes, except for that mine is set 1,000 years earlier. So the same way that any historical author plots their books based on whatever resources they have, letters, diaries, of course, historical events, births, deaths, children, my books are plotted in the same exact way. So but unfortunately, 1,000 years earlier, we don't have the benefit of having diaries and letters and journals and all of those things. So that's where the research has to come in, and then after the research, imagination. But I'm hoping that by the time I get to the imagination point, I've been now researching this timeline for almost 10 years. So I'm hoping that a lot of that is going to feel pretty organic to the reader.
Yeah, I would think so. So there's this sense of filling in the gap, right? Like bridging the scenes in between the letters that we were collecting as historical fictionals, right? And then go, okay, let's bridge the gap here. Let's actually put these people in action and put them in motion. And you mentioned that, so the first one, both the two of them, these people jumped off the page for you in research. As you started writing them as characters, did you feel the same way, that they were coming alive easily for you?
I think that's where the former book editor in me got in the way a little bit. I think a lot of us do, but being a former acquisitions editor at major publishers in New York, I have a really, really intense inner critic. And I was also trying to transition from writing nonfiction into writing fiction. So it was a huge learning curve for me. And finally, when I was able to do it, it was that I had to learn how to master the art of just listening. And when I could listen to the story, that's when it started to come through. I think we block ourselves a lot. We block our own creativity. So I've had to learn a lot about how to step back and allow myself to just listen and be creative and listen to the story as it unfolds.
Well, there's magic in this story, right? So it might feel like if there's magic or if there's sorcery or if there's some kinds of unexplained things that happen, that would feel like it's kind of fun to let your imagination run away with that, right?
You would think so, except for I'm such a stickler about trying to create something that's historical fiction that's not fantasy. These books, my books, get pinned a lot as being historical fantasy. And I understand that. And I think I'm happy that readers that love fantasy come to my books. I think some of them are disappointed that there isn't more magic as they're used to it happening. But what I'm trying to illustrate in my books is what the pre-Christian religion really was. And it was a time period in which both Christians and pre-Christians, pagans, believed in the power of curses. They believed in the power of the turning of the seasons and gods and goddesses. And even Christians would try to raise a fair wind for people. You know, so the saints would raise a fair wind for sailing. I mean, they were thought to be weather workers. That was just par for the course for the 6th century. So one of the things I talk about a lot is trying to raise awareness about the fact that when you have a belief and you enact that belief, that doesn't make it fantasy. And I do try with any of the sort of magical elements to always give them, for the most part, a somewhat reasonable explanation. But I think many people, even today, have had things happen to them that they can't explain. You know, living in the South, one of the things I love to do since I moved here is collect ghost stories. And you'd be amazed how many people in the South have had something happen to them that they can't explain. And it was no different 1,500 years ago. It was, if anything, more common.
Well, and your fairy journey must have helped to open that sort of lens up for you as well, talking to people who maybe in their logical brain think they know better, but there's a sense of faith in these historic traditions and these stories that they've been told, and maybe these sort of unexplained things can be explained with some of those fairy stories. I love the idea of believing in fairies. I feel like I want to adopt that as well.
Yeah, well, you can read fairy tale and you can follow along, and then you can create your own little traditions from that book. That's the point of it. It's supposed to help people re-enchant their own lives as well.
It's fantastic. So this new book, The Forgotten Kingdom, is coming out on, we think, June 12th.
Oh, June 8th it goes on sale. Yep.
June 8th it goes on sale, and June 12th there's a launch.
Mm-hmm.
A real life in-person, get to talk to other people face to face, maybe even like touch elbows launch, right?
Mm-hmm. I can't wait for that. I'm so excited. You know, the hardcover of Forgotten Kingdom came out in September, and I wasn't able to do any in-person events. So to be able to have a big splashy book launch in my hometown is amazing. I'm so excited. And I'm doing some other events in Sumter. I'm doing the Litchfield Luncheon as well. So I get to go around and actually see people again, and I can't wait.
And talk to individuals face to face, talk about your book. How often do you get to spend time with your readers or talk to any of your readers? Have you done any book clubs or anything like that? Have you had a chance to interact with anybody that's read the books?
I like to do book clubs whenever I can. If anyone emails me and I'm able to do it, especially if it's a Monday or Tuesday night, I will always say yes. The one time that I'm not able to do it is when I'm working on deadline, because these books are coming out one after the other. And although some readers are disappointed that book 3 won't be out until September of 2023, what that means for me is that now I'm working extremely hard trying to finish that manuscript, because these books require a lot of research. So it takes me a long time to actually write them. So when I'm writing, I'm not able to. So book tour is really the only time, given my writing schedule, that I get to really interact with readers, which is what makes June so exciting.
Yeah, I'm really excited for you. So the book is coming out June 8th, the big splashy launch with the readers face-to-face June 12th, hopefully. But if you check Signe's website, if that changes, you can get updated there. And I assume you've got an email newsletter people can subscribe to, and they can follow you around on social handles and things like that, so that you're able to hear more about the new book coming out. And I'm excited for you. I think I definitely saw the cover and thought this is a fantasy novel, but the idea that this is historical fiction has me even more excited about this book and getting a chance to read the full trilogy. Can people go back and find the first one? Where should they go to buy the books? Well,
hopefully to their local indie, because our local indies need us now more than ever. almost every single indie store is going to either have in stock Lost Queen or be able to purchase it for you. And then, of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, any of those places as well. It's where you can find fairy tale too. Yep.
I'm excited for you. What else can I do for you? What questions do you have about the South Carolina Writers Association or Write on SC or anything like that? Is there anything I can share with you that maybe you didn't know before?
I would love to know what kind of programming you guys have coming up.
That's an excellent question.
Post-COVID world. Yeah.
That's a good question. So, of course, the radio show is on Saturday mornings at 9 a.m. And then we're broadcasting live on the internet, makethepointradio.com. We are part of the South Carolina Writers Association, and the SCWA actually has a summer series, which is free and open to the public every single Tuesday at noon, Zoom calls, where, I mean, we did it last year, and I think people were a little skeptical because Zoom, right? But we had to. And then this year, everybody was like, please tell me you're doing that again, because they can take a break from work and just sit down and listen to authors such as yourself come on and talk about everything. It's a craft workshops, so they're all have topics associated with them, but everyone is being led by a published author. So it should be a lot of fun, and people can get information on that on myscwa.org. There's more information there, and also on the writeonsc.blog. So there's that as well.
That sounds great. Sign me up.
It should be a lot of fun. Yeah, well, I think educating South Carolina writers, helping. Before I let you go fully, since coming to South Carolina, has there been a South Carolina brand that has made it, a good place to write? Is there something about the community that makes you feel like this was where you were meant to be? I mean, if these stories are taking place in Ireland, Scotland, so you're not really writing about the Low Country, but how do you feel about the Low Country sort of nurturing you and nurturing your craft?
It took a while when I moved here to first plug into the writing community, but after about a year or two, I started to meet some of the other Low Country authors, and there really is such an amazing core here in the Low Country, especially of female writers. So since those women have become some of my closest friends and have mentored me through writing my first novel, it's been a tremendous part of my growth as a fiction writer being here in the South. And at the same time, what's been interesting is because I'm one of the few authors, I think it's myself and Bernard Cornwell are some of the only authors here in the South who live in Charleston who don't write about Charleston. So it's been really interesting to see, readers are a little bit hesitant at first because I think we just are the South and people want to read beach stories and they want to read contemporary women's fiction, or they want to read Civil War or Revolutionary War historical set in the South. So right. It's been really exciting for me to build my career and to see readers join me along the way. And now I've got such a fantastic readership here in the South. It's really something that I don't think I could have achieved anywhere else.
That's exciting. You know what? I'm really interested in hearing you say that too. I think we have a lot of opportunity to expose other people to South Carolina writers. Like you said, not everybody writes about actual South Carolina. We just happen to be here and be doing the writing from here. But I'm glad to support you and really glad to finally meet you, even if it's not really face-to-face yet. And hopefully at some point I'll get another opportunity to promote you and to promote your work. The book, The Forgotten Kingdom, it's coming out June 8th. I'm super excited for you. I'm glad you're going to get to be face-to-face with some folks on June 12th. And maybe someday soon, Signe, you and I can spend some time together. I'd appreciate that.
That would be great. Well, thanks so much for having me on, Casey. It's been so much fun.
You're so welcome. This has been...